in the spirits. I never meant to move into a dead man's room. The landlord advertised it as recently renovated, which should have been my first clue. Nobody renovates a perfectly good room without reason. But the rent was cheap, I was desperate, and my whiskey habit had already eaten through most of my savings. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. I'd pour myself a glass of whiskey, or 3, or 4, just to help me sleep through that watchful silence. It wasn't until my third week that I overheard 2 tenants whispering in the hallway. "That's the room," one said, "where that guy drank himself to death last year." "Jesus," said the other. "They couldn't even rent it for months because of the smell." I should have moved out then, but moving takes money, and money was something I'd poured into too many bottles of booze already. The pounding started a few nights later, always at 3 a.m., like clockwork. At first, I thought it was some asshole neighbor, but when I threw open my door, the hallway was empty. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling, it was coming from my doorway itself, as if someone was desperately trying to get in. "Did you hear that pounding last night?" I asked my neighbor the next morning. She looked at me strangely. "What pounding?" I started drinking more heavily after that. Not that I needed an excuse. The whiskey helped dull the sound, but it couldn't stop the dreams. In them, a figure would lean over my bed, its face inches from mine, screaming with such intensity that I could feel its rancid breath on my skin. The smell was familiar, alcohol and decay, like the lingering scent I sometimes caught in the corners of my room. I'd wake up at exactly 3 a.m., heart pounding, just in time to hear the banging start again. Like any drunk, I left empty bottles everywhere. Behind the dresser, under the bed, inside the closet, just trash from another night of heavy drinking. When the landlord told me about the previous tenant, I realized with a chill that I was going to die the same way he did. He was trying to warn me, each night, every night, trying to stop me from drinking, but I couldn't break the cycle. That night, the dream was different. The demon wasn't screaming, it was crying. In the dim light, I could see its face clearly for the first time, bloated, eyes bloodshot, skin yellowed from liver failure. It was the face of a man who had died in this very room, trying to warn me by becoming the very thing I would fear. I sat up in bed, shaking, as the pounding began right on schedule. But this time, I understood. The room wasn't haunted by a demon. It was haunted by regret, by addiction, by the desperate wish to change the past. The previous tenant wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to save me from his fate. With trembling hands, I reached for the bottle of black velvet on my nightstand, my usual 3 a.m. companion. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. I could almost hear words in it now. "Don't, please, stop." I grabbed the bottle, stood up, and walked to the bathroom. The pounding followed me, growing louder with each step. When I tilted the bottle over the sink, it reached a crescendo. The dark liquid swirled down the drain. Then another bottle, and another. Every drop of whiskey in my room went down that drain while the pounding continued, like a frantic heartbeat. When the last bottle was empty, the pounding stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard what might have been a sigh of relief. I went to treatment the next day. It's been 12 years now, and I haven't had a drink since that night. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m., but not to pounding, just to the quiet gratitude of having broken a cycle that could have ended so differently. They tell me someone else has moved into that room. I hope they hear the pounding. I hope they understand its warning sooner than I did. Most of all, I hope they realize that sometimes what we think is haunting us is really trying to save us. Because not all ghost stories end in tragedy. Sometimes if we listen carefully enough to the warnings of the past, they can lead us toward redemption.